his thing is like only do things that make your beer taste better. And I think as you scale, what makes your beer taste better changes. So like in the beginning, Amazon was doing, using the post office and UPS to do all their shipping, and now they're starting to bring a lot of that in house, which does make their beer taste better. But they have to get to a certain scale before that starts making sense. And I would say the same for us, in different capacities.
It should be something you believe you can be the best in the world at. And that for many, I'll just say in our world of marketing and real estate, I don't know that there's too many of these third-party management companies that could check that box.
There are 10x engineers that are 10 times more, productive than the standard engineer. It feels like there's the same thing when it comes to leasing agents, for example. There are just some of those leasing agents that you like, they could raise the price on you 10% and they're just like so darn good at the job. You're like, totally, yeah, no problem. I can't wait to live here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about that, like property management is basically, we've said in a way, it's like for third parties, like outsourced HR in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so why not just become like the best recruiting firm and have truly the best people in the industry? Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, it only took us 4 years to decide when we have an episode together to sit across from the table, sit across from one another at the table instead of shoulder to shoulder.
Did we figure that out?
No.
Or did somebody else figure that out for us?
Definitely our producer was like, hey, knuckleheads.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
did you look each other in the eye or not?
I'm just happy to hear you say our producer
Yeah.
said this. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's taken note. We haven't implemented much of the feedback yet,
Yeah.
but we're starting to chip away. But we did hire a company, Voics, VOICS, because I was just giving him some crap, for his SEO. But yeah, this guy's been great. I think he's out of Ireland, isn't he?
Darren, yeah.
Yeah, Darren. And so we're really grateful to have him part of the team and helping us try and kind of get to that next level for Digible Dudes. So
A little more pressure. Now someone's listening.
yeah,
We
exactly.
know Darren's listening.
Well,
He gives us notes.
right, exactly. If nothing else, we're gonna be held accountable by Darren. I was really happy to hear, though. I told you at NAA, which was a few weeks ago now, but how many people came up to the booth saying that they listened to us, never had met us, just were looking for some resources on apartment marketing, and really enjoyed the podcast. And then obviously, I think we've done a couple of interviews now in the last month as well, just other podcasts picking us up, wanting to get us on their show. So we're doing something right.
Yeah. It's still fun. That's what matters to me.
Yeah. That's priority number one for us.
Yeah. Well, today we thought we'd bring back, we haven't had this conversation since 2020, but insourcing versus outsourcing. And we have ourselves at different points, which, folks that have listened will have heard things that we insource versus outsource. But it's hitting us more and more when it comes to both customers saying, hey, maybe we should bring websites in-house or whatever it is versus outsourcing. And we're going through some of those decisions ourselves as we reinvest through the rest of 23 and into 24. So good topic that we haven't talked about in about 3 years. So if you were to guess, has your attitude changed from 2020 when we talked about this to now, as far as insourcing versus outsourcing at large?
My general position on it?
Mm-hmm.
No, because my position is you need to model it, factor for, kind of the full equation before you make a decision. And so that creates, I guess, a lot of variability, if you will, like on whether to or whether not to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a hard line. While it helps, I guess, to have some general, I don't want to call them mile markers, but just like, hey, if we get over 50 properties, for example, is that when we should use an agency or when we shouldn't? I don't have those in my back pocket. I think they're somewhat helpful as far as when to have the conversation, but not necessarily whether to actually insource or outsource. So generally speaking, I feel like a lot of the same kind of criteria or components that you need to evaluate are the same ones today. The reason I wanted to talk about it that I mentioned to you just offline was I feel like it is picking up some steam, and maybe it's just one of those things that ebbs and flows. Every few years it seems to come up more. But right now, what's different is I've been hearing more about third-party management companies looking at marketing as a potential revenue source, where they can actually add to those really skinny margins that they're dealing with. And so that's what's, driving the conversation right now. It's not just about savings.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say my thought process on insourcing, outsourcing at Digible at least, and then we can talk about apartments, has morphed a little. Because you and I, as much as well, we read a ton of Jim Collins, and he mentions Amazon a lot through those books. And Bezos, or I've recently heard people start calling him Bezos, so now I'm wondering if I had it wrong the whole time.
I'm still Bezos, but
Well, he and I are on a first name basis, so Jeff.
oh,
When I
okay.
talk to Jeffrey,
Yeah. El
um,
Jefe.
yeah,
Yeah.
he says his thing is like only do things that make your beer taste better. And I think as you scale, what makes your beer taste better changes. So, like in the beginning, Amazon was doing, using the post office and UPS to do all their shipping, and now they're starting to bring a lot of that in house, which does make their beer taste better. But they have to get to a certain scale before that starts making sense. And I would say the same for us, in different capacities. So at the beginning, it didn't, call tracking wasn't something that made a lot of sense to insource. It made total sense to outsource. And then we got to a certain scale where we had enough data coming in that we wanted to do something with it, but didn't have the capabilities to the different platforms we tried. And so then it wasn't just a cost savings, but it was a performative or performance thing as well. And so I just think like at different stages, different things might make your beer taste better. And for Digital, now we're going through that same process with reporting where or analytics where we used to, use Ninja Cat for our stuff, and now we're starting to build our own in house. And that's one for because we got to a certain scale, but and that scale is the same as call tracking, where now it's going to make more sense to specialize a reporting platform versus something that's like just made for all comers, and then to enhance it. So I guess that's my slight morphing on um, our conversation from 2020.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we covered in 2020, as you mentioned, Jim Collins, but the hedgehog, factor of just being able to do one thing really, really well, and that's your best chance to build a great company and an enduring company. And that's the danger of some of these things that you might feel like you have good familiarity with, but aren't actually a true expert in. It sounds a little like a Holiday Inn commercial, although that's a bit of more exaggerated. But for us, like we've been on the customer side of call analytics, for a long time. But we actually hadn't built out a call analytics platform. And so I think there are examples, cautionary tales, if you will, of getting too much of a sense of confidence going into something like this before you actually go through it. Fortunately, that's been a good story for us, and shout out to Victor, for giving us the confidence to go through with it, along with your kind of, I'll say, consultative expertise. But I still think that lesson or rule from good to great is important for everybody to keep in mind when they explore these types of things, because the other scenario, if you're not careful and openly, I think Digital could be moving into these waters where it's like, if you do this too much, it stacks on itself. And suddenly the opportunity cost has gotten a lot bigger than you originally thought. So when you look in isolation at something, I'll say like the call analytics, it's like, yeah, we went through the process, and we ended up making the decision that we could do this, and it's been a good story. Now let's do that to reporting.
Hmm.
Now let's do that to, website builds, et cetera, whatever that next thing looks like. And suddenly your engineering team or whoever you're using to develop this stuff is overwhelmed with all these replacements. And then, that doesn't account for what I started with, which is what can you or can't you productize, which to me is a whole nother element. So it's one thing, and we've also said this, keep talking about Fiona calls, but it's one thing to maintain that, it's another to bring it to market
Hmm.
and the requirements that includes. And you kind of have to redo the P&L at that point, just as far as yeah, what that all entails when you start going to your clients with it.
Yeah, that brings me to my next, well, couple comments. One is I totally agree with you. Part of my thinking has changed based on our own capabilities. Like our tech team has proved to have the chops to be able to go and actually improve on some of these systems and not just replicate them. And I think a lot of that is because we're so narrowly focused in a vertical that it's not like they have to rebuild all of CallRail or something, right?
Mhm.
Or all of NinjaCat. So I think that is a plus for us. But in addition to that, you're absolutely right. where I was going to go is when to outsource might be when you want an expert, someone that lives and breathes it. And so, like for your marketing campaign, like, well, for this, for example, you just mentioned Darren at the beginning. That guy lives and breathes podcast producing,
Mhm.
right? Does that make sense for us to bring a full-time person in house, or should we instead borrow from an expert? And they'll be more effective a few hours a week versus 40 hours a week. And that's how I view it with these other things too. And that's the risk is like, okay, let's if we were just rebuilding call rail, maybe we don't need an expert because maybe it's just a stagnant product that's just got to do some DNI, no big deal, look for bugs.
Mhm.
But if it's call analytics and we're really going after what's happening on these conversations and what is the value of those conversations, that's where we need someone that's living and breathing it to continue to enhance that product. Otherwise, we might as well go with someone else that's best in class, that's what they're going to eat every day.
Mhm.
And so that's where I think, like for reporting, it works for us because our client services team is in there all darn day, and now our paid media team can be in there all darn day. Before they
Mhm.
had to use two different platforms, and that was causing some friction. Now
Mhm.
in one platform, it's going to make it easier, and so they live and breathe it. But if there was ever something that we were looking at, like Snowflake. Like we use Snowflake for our database. Should we really try to build our own Snowflake? Probably not, because that's not something we're eating, living, and breathing every day, but we do need it, right? So let's use the best in class thing for that. Let them, throw all of their new AI models and machine learning on top of it and let us just consume it. It would be hard for me to imagine a time that we that we get big enough that we'd want to build our own Snowflake.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think there may have been 4, um, considerations that Jim Collins mentioned, and it wasn't specifically about insource, outsource, but it's very applicable. He said, it should be something you believe you can be the best in the world at. And that for many, I'll just say in our world of marketing and real estate, I don't know that there's too many of these third party management companies that could check that box. And I'm
Hmm.
not trying to be unfair or critical, but most of what I heard is, there seems to be an opportunity there. We know we may not be as competitive as you guys or bring the same kind of solutions to market, but the it makes enough sense. So they're clearly bypassing that rule. The second is to have the people that are super passionate, meaning it fits culturally. It doesn't feel like you now have an island within your country, or off on the side, I should say. And then the third is the economic engine, and I think that's where a lot of people start, and I'm guilty of that as well, where run that finger across a P&L and it's like, holy cow, look how much money we're spending on call analytics. Could
Hmm.
we do something about that? And sometimes that's still enough, and you are willing to accept. But I think for us, we've been pretty good, and I want to keep it that way as far as maybe we're not quite 10x, but where we feel like we can get to a 4 or 5x on things, whether that's to your point, internal or external. But I'm curious because I didn't really turn this around, if you will, to you on the marketing side. Do you think that this trend is something that is just, you know, circular in a way, like it comes and it goes, or do you think that, what's happening, some of the discussions around third party management companies taking marketing and insourcing it, but for revenue, is a trend we're going to see more of over the next few years, or do you think it's going to just kind of, well, I was going to use a term that I shouldn't use, so flame out?
Yeah. I think you're probably just hearing about it more. It just happened that you got hit by a few folks in your network. And so then it feels like, shoot, is this the murmuring everyone?
Oh, it
But
was a session at NAA. I don't know if you knew that, but I had somebody come up to the booth that I didn't even know.
oh,
So
wow.
it wasn't just a couple people hitting
Wow.
me. They were like, "Yeah, this actually was a session that was really interesting."
Wow. Well, so I don't think that it's like happening that much more. I do think, like as we talked about in a few episodes ago, like if the tools get better for AI and you can start to trust them, it'll come up more.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, where I think it makes sense for marketers or for management companies to do it is more on where there's higher margin, if you're going to do it for revenue purposes. But before I quickly go there, I think if the market turns and it gets harder for management companies to hit the numbers that they need to hit, like if the good times are waning, then I could see it happening more. So it's kind of that whole thing on like trading on multiples. It's like if the value of your management company is 2x or 3x EBITDA, and you're like, well, shoot, man, now I could add X or one times revenue. Now if I could add this much more revenue by passing through the marketing, that's going to be worth it. So I could see a few more the financial engineering type looking at it that direction.
Mhm.
I think though, like, that's not where I would focus if I was a management company, mostly because it's such a small line item on their GL. So if you're gonna really like, it is very complex and a headache for, like, single digit percentile as far as part of your GL. I'd be looking elsewhere for what I might start insourcing first. Now that said, if I was going to do it, I would choose something that's less complicated and that's more taste based. So like performance marketing is definitely more data driven. And if you have an ownership group like LiveCore or something, they're going to be like jumping into the data like heavy to say what is your cost per lead, cost per tour, blah blah blah. And so that means you got to have someone lights out that is commanding that division, versus if you something that's more based on like emotion and feel, like branding. I see the branding side of things way less to overcome when it comes to like how do you make ownership happy, and also there's way larger margins. So it's not just nice revenue, but it's also it's just way better on the margin side. And for those that don't know, on the performance marketing, most companies are only eking out like a 3% EBITDA. That's like standard. So if you're looking at like, well, in the best of times, you're going to make 3%. And then, like, think about the worst of times, like if things go wrong or if you accidentally overspend or whatever, there's just not much room for error. And so I'm just generally, I would lean more on the creative services. And that's not just because that's not what Digible does. If I was focusing somewhere, that's where I would go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you said that your stance has changed a little bit, but I didn't hear in there, and I don't know if you're gonna line up with me on this, but it depends too much just to say broad strokes. Yeah, if I were a management company of 50 properties or more, I would insource, or I would stay outsourced. Would you say there's just too many qualifiers and dependencies for you to take like a position like at a certain size, for example, on one way or another?
Well,
Or would you say I would?
I'm gonna take a page from the recent interview we were doing where Alex said, "It depends." I think you got to know where you're like what you're trying to do. If I was a management company that had more than 20 properties, and I was looking to continue to grow and scale my company to, like, let's say, hit 100 properties. Similar like when Rivergate came to us, RKW, and they were like, you know what, we want to be in the top 50 list in 4 years or whatever
Mhm,
it was.
mhm.
Absolutely not. I'm not insourcing. Like, go focus on like earning your business. But if I'm someone like, I don't know, Bigos or one of these like owner operators that are like really happy with like the scale they're at, they don't want to get way much larger. Then it's
As I'm hearing you say this, it sounds like lease up versus stabilized.
well,
From a management company standpoint, if you're like in that like high growth lease up
yeah.
mindset, you would
Mm-hmm.
take a different approach, meaning not or not, yeah, insource. But
Mm-hmm.
then if you're a Bigos who's more established, happy with their size, that's when you might look at bringing things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I was just trying to think through if there were any downsides to using that analogy. I think that's probably accurate. It's also easier on the owner operated front than third party because you don't have all these. It's that whole thing when you have third party and the owners feel like they can dictate what tech stack you use or who you use. That just makes it complicated to even more complicated, right? To start to scale and decide what headcount you need. But if I was an owner operator and I was looking to more like eke out the best margin I could, it would be so yeah, that on the stabilized front, yeah.
And could you imagine yourself or these third party management companies, if they were to do this, take it a step further, which is a little like us productizing, our call analytics, and actually go to market with that brand independently or as its own service, if you follow me. So if you have 50 properties and you insource all of that, do you stop there? Or could you start competing with a Digible and saying we can provide marketing services beyond just who the properties we manage? Because I feel like some of the bigger companies are exploring that, where it's like this is this is now a division of our company. Why would we contain ourselves to just the properties that we manage?
Again, I think that depends on what you want to be. Do you want your main business to be property management, or do you want your main business to become marketing? Or is it more like SRC, the company from Good to Great, or sorry, help me here.
Great
Great Game of
game. Yeah.
Business. Thank you. Great Game of Business, where they ended up even building their own bank. Um, Now, the SRC is a little different because they give full autonomy to those folks that run these other companies, and they're like, great, we're going to launch a bank, and you're now CEO of this bank, and good luck. And you're serving us, yes, but you can go ahead and build your business how you want to build it, and you share in those profits. I don't think most management companies are there. I think most of those are like everything's kind of folded under one, and you don't get full autonomy. So because of that, I would say probably not. But I do think back to my creative services side of things. That creative services often also is really hard to scale when you bring on staff unless you're outsourcing through contractors, because you have like, okay, this month we have 3 properties that need to do rebrand, and next month we actually have nothing on the docket. So in that sense, to help stabilize just the cash flow, at that point, I would be looking to say like, okay, we take select projects, blah, 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 and then this is, under these circumstances, but it would just be for stabilization, less about like, how do we scale the 150 people creative agency?
Mhm, mhm. Well, something, that I've heard, from multiple companies that have taken a swing at managing beyond their own portfolio is that often that leaves the 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 assets under the third party management feeling like they get second tier service or support, and that's understandable because it's like, well, yeah, we're all part of the same family, but when we're serving, outside of our own portfolio, we have to up our game. It's way more competitive. They're going to get way more attention. And it just seems to me that's the way this story often unfolds if you go that path where
Mhm.
it's like we're going to go ahead and go beyond our own portfolio where there's a lot of internal friction as far as who's getting attention then. And you've said this a million times with ourselves, and Olivia is experiencing this right now, and sometimes it's just bandwidth, but it's like she's trying to get marketing campaigns going for digital and it's like, are we
Right.
treating ourselves like a client, or is she kind of like an afterthought? And I don't think it's quite afterthought, but it's been a challenge for her and we still haven't gotten that right. So I just think that's something to be, I don't know, weary of, or leery, not weary. um, if you're going to do this, is be really thoughtful about what those implications are for, your, call it owned and operated, like, side of it.
Yeah, I think you're right in well, taking the Digible example, we've never been good at flighting our own campaigns, but that's also because it breaks our process. We're so purpose built for multifamily, right? And then digital advertising is we're advertising a marketing firm, so it's just not the same. So that's the process power we have on the multifamily marketing side versus like
Mhm.
going direct. Because it does make me wonder. I wrote down like, do you think like digital? We have some extra capacity right now. Should we then be like picking up jobs on Fiverr or something like to fill our extra
Mhm.
capacity,
Mhm.
or is that something where that it sort of again takes us away from our core focus? It's not built into our process, but on it's kind of the same thing. It would be nice at times, like with our overflow capacity, if we could almost like gig economy up and down.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to put some more thought to that, see if there's a way that that could work for us. I don't know that Fiverr would work. I think it would have to be
I worry it'd be a massive distraction,
totally. Yeah.
and slow us down. Um,
I think it would only work if it was like we were overflow for some other agency in multifamily because it's
yeah.
like what we do. It's like, yep, no problem. We'll set that up. Yep, fix this and try to thing.
Yeah, that would make more sense. So another Jim Collins, we haven't been plugging him as much as, at least I haven't, as I used to, so I'm not gonna feel guilty about
His
this.
royalty check's a little lower this year.
Yeah, exactly. Gotta bump that sucker up. But it's the bullets and cannonballs. So, um, I think you absolutely should shoot a bullet here if you're a third party management company thinking about this. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on what that might look like. We've also struggled to fully define that for here at Digible. It's not just about investment. It's also about the time commit. Um, I think the stakeholders that have to be brought into it. But how would you go about this if you were that 20 property management company and you were trying to decide whether to fully outsource or insource? How would you go about testing that? The hardest thing is the culture, like, how does this, because they say, it's said that this is one of the things to watch out for. Like, what does it mean culturally if you do this and do make this become a habit? But setting that aside, I'm curious to hear you walk through how you'd approach validating that bullet.
Well, that's the problem because I feel like I just wouldn't, because I was very clear, like,
All
I would
right, sorry, Bigos.
yeah, I mean, even well, no, I guess, on the Biga side, it probably does make sense, even beyond creative
Yeah, if
services.
you're 10, 15 years in and you're just like a
Yeah.
oiled machine, but you are seeing profits started to compress, that's the only thing that's really changed, and you're looking for opportunities to offset that, and you have identified marketing as a possibility, how would you go about testing it?
Well, I mean, I probably would bring on someone in a contract capacity at full time so that it wasn't so that I knew that they were getting the right thing, that they were giving like their full attention to it, but they weren't, um, it wasn't a risk of like, we've shot a cannonball, we're making this higher, and then at some point we decide to like reorg.
So that's part of how you'd hedge your bets is you wouldn't go full time, but you would at the same time make sure that they were putting in a
Yeah.
full week.
But it probably doesn't make sense. And then I'd have, like, whoever runs my marketing department, head up that, like, manage that person. Obviously, I would probably pick a channel versus a single property. So I'd be looking at bringing one thing in-house, like SEO or something, and say, "All right, there now how many properties can this person do?" For SEO, for example, versus, like, they take over all performance marketing for one property. And again, I would probably start with those higher margin things where there's less error, like less chance for error, and it don't require as much. That's more sweat equity versus requiring all this tech investment. So when you think of like paid search, for example, like the amount of like infrastructure we've built or bought over the years is just insane for such a small margin. So even though I think people would immediately look at paid search, that's not where I would start just because, yeah, the margin's slim and the startup cost is pretty significant to compete, to be world class at that. But it's not that challenging probably when it comes to like SEO or one of these others.
And would you give yourself a specific time, like, limit, I guess, or horizon, like, to prove this out? Like, would you imagine 6 months, 12 months, 3 months? Like, how quick do you think you could, uh, validate, let's just use SEO as something that is worth pursuing?
Well, this isn't too different from the conversation when you were on vacation that we had with Karina, Nicole, and I. But she was talking about bringing, basically killing the ILS and then making their own mini ILS, and but at the same time that they pulled all their marketing spend off of ILS, they also then fired up like geofencing and social and some things they hadn't done. And so one answer we didn't get to the bottom of on that episode was they started with one person. It was her. And by the time she switched, her role in the organization, they had 12 people. So I was like, well, all the savings that you just recognized from ILS, did you actually just now lose it by converting that to 12 headcount? And, you know, when I was thinking through that, and she didn't know the numbers offhand, but let's just say it was net neutral. She was saying, well, it's still more advanced than they were doing before. So the easy button was the ILS, and obviously they don't make private management companies don't make any margin on that. But now in the 12 people that they have where they've insourced, they are making some margin off of that. So yes, it's more complex, more complicated, but they had the right team building that out and running it. I think if you don't have the right person, just like any division, spearheading it's just going to be more headache than it's worth. So um,
Do you buy into, the data argument for this, which is we just want all that data, like, it's our data, we can make more use of it if we're not outsourcing to a third party or to a third party digital agency. Because we hear this ourselves, especially when it comes to search. But is it in fact really about the data and the control? And are they in fact really leveraging it and doing more analysis kind of
no.
to better and but this is the reality is I think
Hmm.
this is a big part of what we
Hmm.
hear.
Hmm.
It's like it's a data thing, it's a financial thing, it's a revenue thing, and when you really get into those, like our own experience, we rarely see that bear out. Where
Right.
it's like now that you have the data, you're leveraging it all these different ways, and performance and bigger picture, like with the operational metrics, et cetera. And on the financial side, it's hard to say because we don't obviously have exposure to that.
Well,
But back to the net neutral, what does it really look like when you guys do this?
yeah, well, this is the danger of any CEO or executive team at the property management level. Think like in concept makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we would own the data, we could make better decisions, but there's a lot going against you there. So for one, I'll take a very simple example, but up until recently, Digible was the only company I was aware of that could put your pricing in your paid search ad. And it's because we had to build all those integrations and the pipelines and the automation, blah, blah, blah. Now G5 can do it if you're on Real Page. Allegedly. I mean, I've heard um, I've heard some people saying it's not exactly what they promised, but now you have basically the two largest performance marketing companies that can do it, no one else, right? So
Hmm.
is it really realistic that now you're going to do that for across every channel? And also to your point, like one of the reasons we're getting off NinjaCat is because they don't have any of the property management data to pull into their reports. We had to build all those integrations ourselves and put that in our Snowflake and then visualize it that way. So if and I don't know any other company, like even the top three, that management companies that have all of their data in one place where people can access it and pull what they need.
Hmm.
I don't know a single one. And so it's a great theory to say, "We'll now own this data," but in reality, there's not that easy button to, like, stitch it all together, and then to, like, leverage it, move it other places. And then in addition, if you are, like, the fifty property management company, you've only got 50 properties you're looking at versus a Digital that's, got 1,500 properties it's looking at. That when you talk about statistical significance, we hit Lurch on that last time he was on here, and he was saying, "Well, you need at least a minimum of 100 properties to be, like, testing in a control group," is what he was saying. So,
Hmm.
if you need 100 in a control group, so then you're on the top 50 list in MHC top 50 if you even have enough to do a control group, let alone an experiment group. So, again, this is the way I was getting at this, and I'll ask you the question, but let's say that Digital disappeared tomorrow and you're being offered a job at a top 5 company. Would you want to go and build their agency?
No.
Exactly. That's my point. If you don't wanna do it, if I don't wanna do it, that should tell you something where it's like, now it's like Kitchen Confidential or something. It's like now that you've seen everything behind the curtain, it's like, there's no way I'd wanna take that on. So maybe ignorance is bliss for those that are looking at like, "Oh, we could do this as a revenue stream."
Yeah, the irony though in that is that we are replacing a lot of our own big vendors, and seeing if we can find success with it. But to your point, in our own way, I'll say the call analytics was a bullet, even though it, in fact, is a cannonball. But what I mean by that is we were just, kind of stress testing, you could say, our engineering teams to see if they could pull something like that off. They had already shown us that once with the, call it the AI generative content, but our NLG. And so I think that's an important part of this equation, I guess is what I'm getting at. If I were thinking about this as a third party management company, I'd ask, have we done anything like this before and had success? And maybe marketing is too independent for them to point to something, but I feel like there should be other opportunities for them to know whether they're one of those organizations that is capable or is not, because it's a lot like M&A. You see this all the time, back to your point about executives and CEOs, like, we need to go, buy this person, like, this is going to be great for growth and all this stuff, and then they're terrible at the actual merger.
Mhm.
And it never bears out the way they thought.
Mhm.
Versus there are some companies that have shown to be pretty good at that.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's fair using Jeff Bezos. Is it Bezos?
We
Yeah.
don't know now.
And how they've done, but I don't know what that looks like for all employees or universe of Amazon, but you get my point. I think it's great to to do some sort of test of the like,
Yeah.
and show that you're capable
You know,
before you make it part of your recipe.
where I would go though for recipes, every management company is struggling with retention and hiring talent. That's where I'd put my focus. I would basically develop like a recruiting division. And because we all know that like there are 10x engineers that are 10 times more, productive than the standard engineer. It feels like there's the same thing when it comes to leasing agents, for example. There are just some of those leasing agents that you like they could raise the price on you 10% and they're just like so darn good at the job. You're like, totally. Yeah, no problem. I can't wait to live here, right?
Hmm.
And so if you think about that, like property management is basically, we've said in a way, it's like for third parties, like outsourced HR in a way, right?
Mhm.
And so why not just become like the best recruiting firm and have truly the best people in the industry? And then if you have extra capacity or you have extra like human capital coming in, like then you can start to place those. You can call up any of your friends in the metro and say like, I've got this rock star, you know, Tim, you got to pick him up, and I'm only going to charge you a $10,000 recruiting fee.
Mhm. Mhm. I dig it. I like that one a lot. Um, so any other, I guess, maybe I shouldn't ask you since you just came up with a really good one on the recruitment side, but do you see another area that they might want to test or explore outside of marketing and recruitment?
Well, we see some of them testing it with like,
Does apartment locators fit uh, anywhere into this equation?
oh,
Like,
that's
I know one of the
interesting.
things that you look for with an apartment locator, meaning as a consumer, that you are agnostic, that you're not
Hmm.
going to only show me Graystar properties or Lincoln properties or, whatever. But could they kind of start there, just so that they aren't seen as linear to one brand, and but focus there, I'll say, but also support like insert brand
Hmm.
properties. It's such an interesting space to me because of all the change, and that's also been a couple of years since we had, I think, Jason on from a guy that's in Chicago. But they feel like dinosaurs, like they're on borrowed time right now. That's more my words than obviously his. Will they be around? But while they are around, why don't property management companies build out their own like locating divisions?
So yeah, in particular for like the high luxury
Yeah,
properties, that's
yeah.
where I think, because even like even now, I can tell I'm becoming less price sensitive as I just get occupied with Griffin or what have you, right? So I can tell like if I had to go find another apartment, I would want to like hire someone to go do that for me versus me visiting all the places. So
Mhm.
I think that those super luxury properties could make a lot of sense for. Um, and so then why not become, to your point, it's kind of like how, I mean, Zumper even acquired a company that was a locator that, for a while, right, out of New York. So I think in certain markets that could make a lot of sense. I think you would be up against it if like your competition was like, wait a second, why am I going to pay you? So I think you'd have to do it as like a standalone brand.
Right, right. I interrupted you. I feel like you were about to throw out another possibility.
Let's see, we said, oh, I was just saying regionally, we've started to see folks do that with like maintenance teams where
Mhm.
they have a regional maintenance team. And then we even talked to that one company recently that was doing, I can't remember who it is to give them credit, but that was doing remote, um, like DIY, like, hey, you could have used that last night to fix your toilet, right? Like get on the Zoom with somebody and
Mhm.
walk you through it. So I think there could be something there. I mean, frankly, even if you mentioned, well, like call center. Call centers are super expensive, but it's something that like if you're Bigos and you have your own call center, then why not start offering that service to other management companies? Same thing with like I was gonna say maintenance, but it's like why isn't there the AWS of like apartment maintenance? Like if
Mhm.
you're Graystar or Lincoln and you've got density in a market and you've already got 100 maintenance folks, it goes back to having best in class. It's like why not send charge a fractional cost to
Mhm.
be able to go and service the property next door.
Mhm. Mhm. Backing up to what you said about SEO being, well, I was asking you after you said I'd probably start with just one platform. Give me an example, but is that in fact where you start? Or I think about something like geofencing or display. And I'm not trying to somehow marginalize or make this sound like an easier lift than search, but I'm also not going to deny that. Like trying to take on, as you were saying, lead gen platforms like, PPC versus organic SEO, two very different ball games. That being said, I think we both know there's a lot more that you could do. We're trying to do with SEO that is not as easy as you might think. But let me move outside of those two and just, would you, as it relates to the rest of that marketing sphere, like you have your Craigslist, I don't know if we call that marketing, I'm going to call it marketing, management, you have your Google business profile, you have more your kind of tertiary or upper funnel, like a TikTok, your Spotify, your display, your email marketing. Is there any other on that list that you'd be like, yeah, I'd probably start there? or that would be my next move after SEO.
Well, I think it depends what you can actually start to charge your customers. I don't know enough about that. So, for example, every ownership group that uses third party that I know, there's some minimum that they seem to think like, oh, well, I pay for this marketing person, right? So shouldn't that person be doing my social media, or shouldn't my person be doing X, Y, and Z? And so I'd love to learn more about that and figure out why do they press on certain things like my Google business profile. You guys should just handle that, right? You don't need to pay a firm to do that.
Mhm,
Versus
mhm.
like when they can get away with like now paying managing a firm. Because if I was an owner, there's certain things like organic social. I'd be like, well, shouldn't the on-site team be able to handle that? Like, why do I need to pay $800 a month or something to some other company to do it? Um, but yeah, it's because I'm focused on the higher margin stuff that I said things like SEO or creative services. If it's more about just revenue, it's gonna be way easier to get the revenue from paid search. It just that's where it gets complicated,
Sure.
right? As I said, it's low margin. But if you think that it's gonna like you're trading on a meaning if you're the bean counter and you're looking to position your management company for a sale at some point and you're trading on revenue versus EBITDA, then yeah, then you have to go for paid search. But if it's or do the ILS management thing that we've talked about, right? Because it's
Mhm.
such a big portion. Or otherwise, I'd go after the margin, which is going to be, as you said, like SEO, creative services, and the
Right.
like.
Makes sense. Well, how do you handle then another one of your favorite topics I know, at least it's been for us, is white labeling. So if you're a hybrid and you're not fully insourcing marketing services, so again, use case, I'm a third party management company. I'm gonna say Bigos. We love you, Tanya. And you've decided it's time. We're gonna take well, when I say time, we're gonna take a couple platforms, but we still want to use you for these other platforms. How do you approach that then with your clients? Where do you communicate that? Do you not communicate that? And maybe part of this is what is your end game, as you like to say? What are you really trying to achieve here? But I think this is where it can get tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, yeah, we went ahead and took search in house, but we're still using
Mm-hmm.
Digible for our TikTok. So that gets hard when you're going to clients, and I think you're negotiating deals and talking about your proposition. When you have an asterisk, I'll say it's like, well, some of this stuff we still outsource.
Yeah.
So do you think that that would be a sticking point for you if you were trying to make a decision, or would you comfortably like lean into that hybrid, some's outsourced, some's insourced, and then if you were to try and get comfortable with that, does that mean that you would or wouldn't white label?
Well, that's where it comes down to again what my goal is. If my goal was just more margin, then I'm probably going to have a sub brand. So it wouldn't be like Bigos Marketing. It'd be like some other brand, sort of like what 53 did with or Cardinal did with 53,
Yeah,
right?
something totally independent.
Right, and then it's like, let that be its own business unit. But if I was gonna use this as an example of like, "Hey, why come to you guys versus the big 3 or whatever," it would be, "Oh, well, because we have our own in-house crew, they live and breathe this, they're the best, and it actually is gonna be less expensive. So, yes, my management fee is 5%, but look at all these savings you're gonna get because 'cause you're not paying all these agency fees." So that's a different strategy, right, than the EBITDA model. So if I was going the EBITDA model, it has to be a third party, and then I would just be again, it would have to depend on your positioning. If it was Digible, we would be as we like to be with consultants saying like, well, here's what we have in house and this is why you would use us versus this is why you would outsource. But some companies that are now taking the stance of like, this is our stack. It's like, this is the stack and you have no option. If you're going to do business with us, you got to use our in-house team for these things.
Mhm.
So I think you gotta it's sort of like what Todd from Anyone Home told us, years ago in our first year in business. And he's like, you gotta know what you're going for here. If you know what you're going for, then that first principle should really make the rest of it shake out pretty easily.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I was gonna ask you on a little bit off the marketing front, but when it comes to digital with outsourcing, like there's a lot of the tech that we're starting to bring in house, but I even think of other positions. Like one thing that surprised me was how, I mean, we haven't met all of them, but we've met several of the attorneys from Graystar, for example, and I'm just surprised they don't have more in-house attorneys than they do. So Digital has we've had Jim, and he's um, well, he's a contractor, right? And so, are there other things here where you would say, "Hey, it's not going to make our beer taste better, and we should just continue to outsource and go get the experts in that"? Versus, do we get big enough where we need to bring Jim in house, for example? So, just wondering, like, what when you look at it from these other department angles, what are some of those other ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel far more equipped, with the marketing, kind of the day to day stuff that we spend most of our time on and making that call. But we have brought this up a few times. It's like, and it, could it be as simple when it comes to those professional services like attorneys and accounting, that it's just when the fees hit a tipping point, that you know that's that's uh that's where we make a change, and we start looking at bringing in our legal counsel. um
But that's
Trying
kind
to.
of but that's kind of that whole angle of, like, as you said, running your finger across the P&L versus there must be categories where it makes sense, even if the fees are more, to pay more for this expert. So, like, in the case of accounting, like, for tax purposes, like, w wouldn't an outsourced tax strategist make more sense? Someone that sees 100 companies a year versus 1 company a year?
Yeah, absolutely, totally fair point, because they're true experts, and there's also something we deliver to our clients, and I think we just got this from Margaret, our facilitator for EOS out in Boulder, where she shared this Kobe analysis with us. And because she's a licensed facilitator and all this, she's like, this is at no cost. This is just part of my business, and I'm able
Mhm.
to give this as kind of value add. And so there's the expertise. I'll still stick with Margaret because she's seen hundreds of companies on EOS, and then she has some other subscriptions herself that she can, provide. So, great point. Like, and when I think about the attorney thing, we may have, let's say, six figures in attorney fees. I'll just say low six figures, but that doesn't mean bringing somebody on at that amount is going to be the equivalent of, like, if we were to continue working with somebody the caliber of Jim. And I do feel that way. AR is a good example. I
Mhm.
absolutely love our third party there, and I can't imagine, no matter what the cost was.
Mhm.
And that's just a huge testament to them. So I do think you have to look beyond. And hopefully you know that. Like, I look beyond just the numbers, but
Mhm.
that's the quickest way to say, here's our list
Right,
this
right.
year that we should at least be talking about, and then some within 2 minutes you move on. And
Mhm.
that's obviously where you want to be if you are that third party or that vendor, where they just quickly move on and say there's
And
too much value there.
there's a good example there between our IT versus AR. Like, we outsourced IT, and we're even looking at spending more by bringing someone in house than outsourcing because it's just been such a pain.
Yep.
Versus for AR, we would easily pay two or three times as much as we do now because it's just handled and it's so gracefully.
Yeah, I hope they're not listening.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell
But I
Eric.
feel the same
I'll tell
way.
Eric from Axum to give it a listen.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
great.
and, so I think there's certain things. It's the where my head goes is I think you're right. Like, it's an easy flag for to go through the P&L and be like, "Yep, that looks like at least a head count. Let's explore it." But then my next decision is probably, well, is there more value of being experts in the company of Digible or being experts in your field
Hmm.
helping Digital?
Hmm.
And that's where, like, tax, for example, like, I don't know how being experts in Digital is going to be advantageous versus being an expert in tax. But, like, HR is an example where you should be an expert in digital versus, like, an expert in HR, right?
Hmm.
At least meaning being ingrained in the company.
Hmm.
So I'm sure that applies, like, with legal and some other places too.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think that covers it pretty well. I'm sure we'll have more thoughts, and this is a conversation, even if it is just a flurry right now, that we know will be a point of interest throughout the next few years. And it'd be interesting where we fit versus how it's working for third party management. I think I also said that to you before. It's like, to me, there's kind of a surplus of vendors right now, as well as third party management companies. And tech is the disruption that's between us. And where do we evolve? How do we evolve, as part of this equation? And same is true for third party management. I know there'll still be a marriage, probably for the next several years, between the two as it relates to digital marketing and advertising with these third party management companies. But I feel like it's more than just a little bit of chatter. I think there's something bigger that's happening. But knowing this industry for better or worse, it's probably going to take longer to really take root and see some of those changes than what you might be seeing in some of the other industries like an automotive, a healthcare that already probably have some better infrastructure or experts to guide them through something like this. I feel like right now in multifamily, a lot of these third party management companies would still be starting from scratch.
Hmm.
They don't have much, if any, institutional knowledge, so they're literally at ground zero. Where it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, that would be awesome. Very different than if you have a few people in the organization that have already been there, done that, or comfortable with that type of move. And I think that's part of why we've done what we've done is we've had enough knowledge underneath us to give us the confidence to do some of these tests.
Well, one last question, because I hear you on that. So as technology is disrupting different industries right now, it is a scary proposition for if I was someone to get into it. Versus like, hey, let's let Digible burn their R&D dollars
Mhm.
figuring this out first, and
Yeah.
then like if new whiz bang platform comes along and you can just tell ChatGPT to run my advertising, then take advantage of it. Versus hiring on like an old model and then going through the same disruption that Digible may or may not be going through. But when you think of I want to ask you this, since you are often focused on getting top talent, does it make more sense to you as an operator? Let's say you run your finger along the P&L and you see six different opportunities. Does it make more sense to pick an opportunity and then go find the person to run that opportunity, or to find a person and then pick the opportunity?
I'd say opportunity first.
Mm.
Um, I think it's more, I don't know if the word's responsible, but knowing me, I mean, I don't know if I have a good example of this at Digital, but I can come across talent, get super excited and say, if we just had that person, I think we could we
Hmm.
could make a run at X, Y, or Z. But so far, I think it's fair to say we've been more opportunity based than we go
Hmm.
try and find the person. Um, I think that could be you'd have to be so selective, if
Hmm.
you were to do it the other way around.
Hmm.
I wouldn't appreciate it if you did that, and you probably wouldn't. Hey, I met this guy at a bar, and he is
Hmm.
so good at event marketing. Let's
Yeah.
go do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think opportunity first.
I think you're right. I think my caveats on those are, one, you and I haven't worked with a ton of executive recruiters yet, because some of them, like, we've been surprised when we have talked to them. We're like, we can find you someone in 3 months. I'm like, I thought this was like a 24-month find to get this type of person. They're like 3 months. So I think there's something there where it's like, maybe if we were using more executive recruiters, I would have more confidence in that approach. But as we stand today, where we're not using a ton of executive recruiters, it makes me feel like, let's put the opportunities up on the board and then see when the right person, comes our way. Still be very selective, but give it 12 months or whatever, 24 months. But, as we try a few of these executive recruiters, maybe I'll change my mind and say, like, you can always go get someone.
Mhm.
And then it's more about us closing them.
Totally. I think the thing on bringing in the executive, especially if you don't have, which we're going through that process now on a couple fronts, but if you don't have the background, is just be prepared for the full cost,
Mm,
and the level of that commitment. It's not the right thing to do to bring somebody in like that with big hopes, aspirations of changing, an identity of a company or pursuing, a new business model, etc., and not resource them and not give them the time. They shouldn't have endless time, but I just understand that myself, having
mhm,
been on the other end where I had executive recruiters, coming after me, placing me obviously at these media companies. And it was always with the expectation that I was going to be a change agent, get them where they needed to be on digital, but I never could do it alone. And so, within short amount of time, I was like, I'm going to need this, 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 and this. And that's really should happen up front, and some companies are more cognizant of that than others as far as the questions they ask. What does
mhm.
this really look like if we do this, bring you in? So yeah, I just think that's a critical piece of that whole new executive search strategy.
Yeah, totally. All right, cool. Well, hope you guys got some out of today, and In another 3 years, we'll do insource versus outsource again.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Bated breath.
Another riveting
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. See you.